This is another of our interviews today with Paul Sachs for the history of Memphis running. For some of you who will be watching this in the future, you may not know who Paul Sachs is. The majority of folks who've been running for any length of time have met Paul or been at one of his races. Paul, I'll turn it over to him. He started running in?
My first race was in 1982. Here in Memphis, the Night Moves race, and I was hooked from then on. Went on and ran the Memphis Marathon in '82, and then I ran pretty much every Memphis Marathon up to, I guess, 1999. Yeah, wow. So I ran 16 Memphis Marathons.
And you won?
In 1987, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so, I had a background of playing tennis at the University of Memphis and at Shelby State Junior College, and that fitness level and that maybe competitiveness took me into running pretty quickly. I had a good influence in our friend Nash Jimenez, who had run the San Francisco Marathon in '82 and qualified for Boston. And I kind of said to myself, he's a great friend. If he can do it, then we're going to give it a shot too. And it just.
What was your time at Boston, that first one?
Back in 1982, the qualifying time for men, if you remember, was 39 and under, and I was 21-something years old at the time. You had to break 250, which was quite of a challenge, and I think that they've relaxed those times, and this being 2018, they've relaxed those times quite a bit.
Right.
So my first Memphis Marathon, I ran 2:55. I did not qualify, and then next year I went and ran Memphis in 2:43, so this is 1983, and then went and ran my first Boston in 2 hours and 40 minutes. So that was a great thing. That in 1984 was actually an amateur race. There was no prize money, but it was a high level of runners then competing also. Right. Maybe faster. I'd say the top 100th runner in 1984 was much faster than the 100th runner now.
I would certainly agree with that.
Yeah.
You've run in Memphis primarily.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I'm a Memphian.
Yeah. What your favorite races in town?
Oh, well, for sure, the marathon, the 5 Mile Classic, the Oak Run for St. Jude, you got the Mike Cody race, golly. Those are Memphis in May, which is a 10K, which is no longer around. And some of these races are no longer around. They went for an extended period of time. 5 Mile Classic. Probably the only one around. Marathon, yes, it kind of changed in dimensions when St. Jude took it over in 2001. From the first year I ran the marathon at the Penal Forum, I think there was 100 runners and maybe 112 finishers, and now there's probably 3,000. But I think the time for the winning time for the marathon in '82, which was John Mahundro, was much faster than the winning time this year.
Oh yeah, so absolutely.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, the Penal Forum was not one of our favorite venues for a marathon.
No, I guess it should be mine because I won in '87 out there, but that's the last year it was run out there for many reasons.
Oh, absolutely. One being that the only audience you had were the corn stalks rattling along the side of the road and the crows.
The wind blew from all 5 directions, north, east, south, and west, and from straight down. It's tough on a windy day.
As we always said, it was always in your face.
Yeah, it was. It's crazy.
Memphis in May 10K, I really missed that race. I think that was one of my first distance races, and I was so disappointed when we let it slip. Although I think this past year and the coming year, there is a new race affiliated with Memphis in May. I don't know if they call it the Great River Run or something like that. There'll be a 10,000.
End of the month, as opposed to the early May where it's a little bit cooler.
A little bit nicer.
Memphis is a hot town, and just I think that, and I think that is a half marathon. So to run a half marathon at the end of May in Memphis is very tough. You talk about that we'll go on to something else, but the 10K certainly transformed into a half marathon. In the early 2000s, you could really see it coming, that there used to be a lot of 10Ks around the country.
Right.
You know, ones that will be around as long as people are watching this. Hopefully the Peachtree Race, the Crescent City Classic in New Orleans, and but a lot of other ones have faded away. I mean,
Well, I think we still have the Gumtree,
yeah, the Gumtree,
Tupelo, and they
Yeah.
have the Cotton Row Run and the Mobile Azalea Trail.
And you know, you don't hear a lot about those anymore. I mean, they used to have a Racing South series, and
That's right.
I mean, you know, you and I aren't running that much anymore, but I don't hear anything about the Racing South series. It was a big deal.
It was.
And it was all pretty much, and Memphis and May was probably part of that one time too. But it disappeared and it changed into the half marathon. I do think that this being 2018, you're going to see in the next couple of years that the 10K will come back as the primary distance race, because running 2 hours and a half marathon is hard to do, and running it a 10K in an hour, just plus or minus a little bit, is a lot more feasible for the regular.
I think it'll attract as many people or more people for the shorter distance. And
Yeah, and it's still a challenge. I mean, I think the 5K is, as you know, in Memphis, we got a 5K every weekend, which used to not be the case back in the day either. What that day was is back when I was running the 80s and 90s, is you didn't have a race every weekend.
Right.
You had to search for something. So, but now they have them all the time, maybe 3 races a weekend. And I think when we were on the board of the track club, we kind of wanted to nip that, and just because it took away.
Absolutely.
You know, you have only so many runners, and it's not good for anybody to run 2 races in one
it diluted
weekend.
the field, and I think the argument has always been socially the 5K attracts so many more new runners and racers to the scene, but then there's nothing beyond that other than a couple of 10Ks and then the half marathon. So you can, I found the 5K to be a sprint. The 10K, almost like a sprint. According, when you did the 10K, you really had to work hard and strategize for those 6.2 miles, I think. But
I never found the 5K a sprint, but it was, yeah.
Well, in comparison.
It was. You're out there, half the time, and but you really had to think about it. So, I always thought that here in Memphis you could get through 2 miles comfortably, no matter what the weather is. Elvis Presley,
Right.
They changed it from a 10K to a 5K because it was in August. I mean, it just, you couldn't do it.
The first one was miserable.
Too dangerous.
Yeah.
Too dangerous.
Well, your races, you now administer several races in town. Talk about those.
Okay, so I was race director for the Overton Park 5 Mile Classic as the race director for 15 years, from the 26th year to the 40th year. And then I had to say I got a voice from God to start a Memorial Day run 6 years ago. So I think it's 2012 was the first one. And so we followed up with that. And so, for me, it's been a great transition from being a competitive runner and go to the other side and see what it's like to put on a race. And there is a lot that goes on that, you go out and run the race, and people take a lot of stuff for granted. Like, as you know, in the 5 Mile Classic, that's on the roads and trails. I spent a lot of time out there with a lot of volunteers, making sure those trails were clear and cleaned for those runners, so they didn't get hurt out there. Hurricane Elvis that came through here took down so many trees. We spent a lot of time clearing the trails for those runners. So the Memorial Day run, which is, is just a 2-loop in Overton Park, but it just takes time to. It takes a lot of time to get sponsors, to get permits, to get runners, a lot of registration. We talked about before we started taping this, is that how quickly people need to understand is that back in the day, you registered by mail, and you had hard copies of race applications. Now everything is races online. You go click a button on the computer and says sign up here, and I guess that means when you sign up there, you have you've signed up. I kind of wonder about kids that are 18 and under that sign up for races. Is it legal now? Just think about that.
I think there's a disclaimer in very fine print somewhere in that application online, but if anyone scrolls down to see it, that may be the other.
Yeah, I just thought about that, but with the Bud Mile that we do in June,
right.
For Bud Joiner, is if you're under 18 years old, your parent has to sign that, or a guardian has to sign that for you, or you're not running.
And of course, online, who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. So
the cost associated with racing now too is quadrupled, I guess, or even more.
Changed dramatically. Is the Boston Marathon in 1988. I went back and just was looking through my old texts and just getting rid of stuff, and I registered, and it was $15, and then 12 went to TAC of New England, which is like that was just a gift, but it was $15. Now I'm sure I haven't raced it in some time, but I believe it's right around 150. I think it's 150 for Memphis, right. And so that's a dramatic change, and the races that I have been race director for is we try to keep it a minimal fee, $20. Be a little bit more for the 5 Mile Classic in 2018 because we've got right. Bill Rogers and Joe Benoit coming in, but it's still going to be cheaper than other races. There's another race in town this weekend, $40 to run the series. It's $160 for 4 races. Right. I mean, that's.
And I think people look, and I hear people talk about the bling that comes with that. Sort of money that you're putting out. They look at the gift, but the goodie bag they call it. It comes with not only a T-shirt but a trinket, finisher trinket of some kind, and all of that supposedly. And there's money that goes back to the sponsor or the charity that's underlying the sponsorship.
I hope so. I mean, I can honestly say that all our money has gone to charity or gone back to the race and helped build the race some.
Well, let's talk. You mentioned Bill Rogers and Joan Benoit Samuelson coming in 2018 to the Overton Park Classic, which will be in October.
Yep, October.
It's 2018. So mark your calendars if this is on air by then. To ensure that you are out there. This is the oldest foot race in Memphis. It'll be the
45th year. 45th year. Yep.
45 years of it, and I think I came to it. I looked at my quilt the other day. I have 3 quilts, and one of them has my earliest T-shirt, and it's the 5th.
Wow, that's amazing. It's great.
I skipped a few and then came back to the 9th. And anyway, cool. This past November, we had the Overton Park Classic again through Overton Park. That's what we were discussing. Bill Rogers was here. For those who don't know who Bill Rogers was.
Oh, Bill Rogers, probably the dominant figure in American marathoning. Won Boston 4 times and won New York 4 times. And that is back in the 70s, probably starting in 75. And I think he was on the Olympic team in 76, so I think maybe he did not run Boston that year, but I think he won it in 75, 77, 78, 79, and then New York 4 of those years. So I think once he won Boston and New York the same year, which is huge.
And that was back in the day when there were no enormous purses as there are today for the winners. $500,000 for winning the race.
I still think he would have won. I mean, I still think he would have won those races. He did it for the love of running. I think like for one of his races, he got not for the Boston or New York, but I think for another race, a big race, he got a set of tires. It's just crazy stuff. I think crazy stuff back in the day there. But, it was great for us to have Bill Rogers here for the 5 Mile Classic. And you look at, for who the 5 Mile Classic has had through the years. Craig Virgin,
who was an American, who held the 10,000 meter world championship time, won the world cross-country championship. Go on, I'm sorry.
With that in Peachtree several times. I mean, he was probably one of the guys that got it going too. I'd say he's one of the guys that got the running boom going. Frank Shorter won the marathon in the Olympics in 1972, came here for the 5 Mile Classic. Jim Bailey, first man to break the 4-minute mile in the United States back in 1956, and barely missed a world record at that time. I think he's the 6th guy to break a 4-minute mile here in Memphis. Peter Snell, the king of middle distance running, was the last person and the only person to win the 800 and 1500 gold medals in the Olympics in Tokyo in 1964.
Gosh.
No one's done that post-World War II. Who else was here? Dave Waddell, our
Finelli.
Gary Finelli.
Who was a sensational runner. I don't know if he won any of the major championships, or races, but was certainly a contender at the marathon distance, 10,000 meters too.
I mean, but to have those people here, you got to understand that this is not a giant race. We've never had more than 500 people at the race. This year we had 150 finishers.
Right.
When Bill Rogers was here, but it's through the generosity of Memphians that have been able to support and sponsor the race and be able to say, does this make financial sense? And no, it didn't, but it really did make emotional sense to have him here, to have him meet, and he was such a great person and talk to everybody. He made it like this is his home, this is his race, and you are my friend. So,
and I think part of the reason the numbers were down was that there were other, as we've mentioned, there were other races and over that weekend that drew away the interest that should have been there for the Classic, the oldest foot race in Memphis, with an icon in American racing.
Yes.
And hopefully in 2018 we can match the highest 500 number that have ever shown up at the race. Paul was mentioning the fact that the first Classic, there were no women runners, obviously no finishers. This past time, there were about 50-50, right?
50-50, yep.
And we're seeing more involvement by women and interest by women in the Overton Park race. So I'll plug it right now. Come on and begin to look forward to the October date, meeting these people and running the race.
And Joan Benoit Samuelson who won the Olympics in 1984 as an American. I think she was a great catalyst on that, and I think if you look on Wikipedia, and it says what she did, but it doesn't say what she influence. It says what she did, but what she influenced. She was a huge influence on that and making running more mainstream. That, hey, I mean, certainly women ran marathons before 1984,
right?
But not many, and it took a long time for the Boston Athletic Association to recognize women runners, to really recognize them. And I think that's what Bill Rogers said this year, is that they went back and got the runners maybe pre-1980 and recognized them just sometime recently, in maybe the last 10 years, but I mean, that's a long time.
Yeah, it's memorable photograph of was Schweitzer, I think was her name?
Yes.
Being pushed aside by the Boston
Jock Semple, the racetrack Jock Semple, and her boyfriend was, I think, a shot putter, and he got Jock Semple out of there, and she finished the race, and they became good friends after that. So.
No doubt. Tell me more about your involvement in the Memphis community. I know you're still a tennis teaching pro at the University Club of Memphis.
Yep, 35 years.
35 years.
So, we do a Tuesday night track workout every Tuesday at the University of Memphis, and that has been going on a long time, and started by Coach Frank Horton, who passed away in 1990, and I ran with Coach Horton probably from for 5 years, probably from 84, 85 till 1990. And I don't know if we've talked about Frank Horton in your segments before, but he's an amazing man. And he was out there every Tuesday till the week before he died.
Right.
So amazing that. Pretty funny. Yeah, he's a great guy. So, I kind of picked it up from there and just have been doing it kind of, ever since then.
Right. Terry Bishop and I had worried about track workouts. Neither one of us had much of a track background, if any at all, and the club, the Memphis Runners Track Club, didn't offer any experience on the track, and there was no one out at the track other than people working out to oversee it. So we thought in our little minds that we would organize a little group, and we go out there and time people. Well, what we found out after the first meeting out there was that we couldn't run our workout and time other people at the same time.
That's so true. Yes, it doesn't work that way.
We contacted Frank, and he was gracious and came out, and in his typical way, immediately, just with his clipboard and his whistle and his stopwatch, he just immediately took over. And it was the greatest thing. He organized my workouts so that I could maximize my poor talent, and certainly helped Terry and a lot of other people over those years.
No doubt. And for me, it's been great to meet so many people out there. I mean, I think that's a great thing about running, and certainly running at Memphis. I think Memphis is such a great community, and you come in here as from another state or another city, and you come to the track work, or go to a race, and immediately there's a connection. I think you look at Eric Laywell, who came to Memphis from Michigan, and just there was immediate connection. And I wouldn't say that, but close friends now. But when he came here, he immediately was brought into the Memphis running community. And I think that's the great thing about Memphis.
Yeah, I hear it over and over again from people who come into I'm working a few hours these days at breakaway running, and we'll now and then run up against someone who's just moved here, and they ask some questions, and they'll go, gosh, it's such a great and vibrant community of runners. And I've never met a runner, well, I hadn't up until probably the 2000s, who wouldn't speak. Yeah. Now, since then, I think it's evolved that women are a little bit more cautious about who they speak to, but still in all, it's a friendly community, an open and welcoming community.
Oh, absolutely. It is great. That's what I felt. And running's been so good for me to meet the people I've met. I mean, just, that here is the former Attorney General for the state of Tennessee is dropping by applications and putting on my windshield of my car yesterday so we can promote a race in town. Well, it's actually his race, but that stuff doesn't happen. I mean, here's a guy that's Mike Cody, the champion of civil rights in the country. That's what's great about Memphis running. I think one of the great things about Memphis running.
He has a 4-miler, and the Mike Cody 4-miler will be coming up
February 3rd.
February 3rd at Rhodes College, Rhodes College, University at North Parkway.
Yep.
And that's a fairly recent addition to the racing calendar in town. I think it's...
Well, actually, it changed names to, it was the Rhodes College 4-miler, and it's been around for a while, but it changed to the Mike Cody 4-miler probably back in the late 90s or early 2000s.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, so I've got quite a few Mike Cody shirts on, a collection of Mike Cody shirts, and happy to have all of them.
And also, people who see this, Paul probably has more memorabilia of running in general and Memphis running than anybody I know.
Giving it a lot of it away to Breakaway, but yeah.
A lot of it hanging in Breakaway stores.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's mine. I was glad to get rid of it. I was tired of having a museum at my house.
we were
pretty good one though.
We were tickled to see you show up at the Saturday morning run with Bill Rogers, and you had on the exact Bill Rogers top.
Yeah,
a running top, which was I guess a wind resistant or water, maybe repellent top that was blue and yellow.
Yeah, and I had another one. I gave it to him because he didn't have any left. It's Bill Rogers running gear, and but his store closed probably back in 2007, and he didn't have anything left. So when he was coming here, I said, well, I'm going to go on eBay and see if I can find some stuff, and I found a couple tops, and so I gave him one of mine so he could take it home. But yeah. So yeah, it was kind of cool to have that stuff there and have a connection that way. So well, hey, listen, you'll know Cody and I because we're going to be wearing Bill Rogers stuff when we see you at the airport. It was easy. It was easy. Yeah, you're Paul and Mike. Yeah.
If Ron Hill ever comes to Memphis, I'm sure Cody has a.
Oh, he still does. He probably still has his bag and all his stuff.
Ron Hill, who was a great British UK runner who had a line of clothing that Breakaway picked up in the early 80s, and touted for a while until it sort of died away, the interest in it. Our American manufacturers came along, I guess, instead. You quit competing about when?
Well, I had knee surgery in 2000, and it took a while to come back from that for arthritis in my knee and some just bad knee damage, I guess, for really arthritis. So I got back into running, and I had a decent run back in the 2000s, 2006, 7, 8, 9, and then had an issue in 2011, and subsequently had a pacemaker put in after that because I couldn't breathe. So it was a bad thing. Yeah, the pacemaker kind of set me back a little bit, and age probably another thing. But yeah, I had a pretty good run from 82 to the late 90s, setback with the knee, and then what I would say is if I could do it all over again, I would. My advice would be is to run on a soft surface. I ran too much on a hard surface, too much concrete and asphalt, and I think it catches up with you. Some people. That's been my advice since 2000 is get on a soft surface, and some people buy into it, some people don't, and you wonder why people aren't running anymore. But Calvin Johnson is one of our greats. He's pretty much soft surface, and that's why he's still running well. I mean, he's 70, probably close to 70 years old, I believe, and still running real well.
Yeah, he sure is.
For his age, not racing much anymore, but golly, up till. I'll put this in 1983, won the Boys Town 5K in 1983, first place, and 25 years later, I think it was 2008, he's top 5 at the Boys Town race. So I think that's we're proud of him.
Yeah, we've had him on, and I tried to get him to come back, and he stays relatively busy. He still works.
Yeah.
But you'll see him if you are a Midtownite. You will see Calvin, a tall, thin fellow with graying hair. He's usually running very slowly. He lives on Vinton, I believe, and but his workouts, he blazes a mile loop in the Overton Park. Yeah. He will do repeats over there uphill.
On the grass and just
and it's
or on the soft surface. He's not on the road. You'll see him jogging. You see him jogging real slow and he used to go to the Hollywood track, so he jogged real slow to there. Always jog slow on the roads. I can't say, he used to run actually on Saturday mornings. He'd probably run out to Yates and back on the roads, but it was always slow. It wasn't
very slow.
Fast. Wasn't fast on the road.
He pointed out to us. He was talking about Glenn Hayes, and he said Glenn Hayes is the one who convinced him that when you run slow, you run very slow, and you don't, and you try to run on soft surfaces. We stress that at Breakaway, and I've always stressed it since I started running on soft surfaces, probably in the mid-'80s. Until then, we pounded the roads, and I think my knees show it today that I can run 3 to 4 days a week, and it's slowly, and it's still in all that's with pain. but at least I'm running. So
And you run on soft surface.
I'm running on soft surfaces now.
Yep.
I just cannot run on hard
No, I
surfaces.
can't. That's the one thing I would change, and that's the one thing that I try to instill to everybody is that the more you can run on soft surface, the longer you're going to run, and the more pain-free you're going to run. I don't think anybody gets a pass, and once that water glass is full, it's full.
It's full.
There's
You're
no-
coaching now some people around town, are you not?
Oh yeah, every Tuesday night we're still.
Well, I know, but
yeah.
I've seen you out with a group on Saturday mornings or some mornings.
No, I think it's Tuesday, Thursday. I was helping some women that were club members at the university club, or just, and they wanted to, improve their fitness, and I did that for a while. It's just, and we had some great success. You take people that never ran before, and run a 10-miler. And run a half marathon. I mean, I think that's the thing. I think I will say this: there's a lady named Pam Gold out there, the Golden Girl, who runs on the track with us every Tuesday night. And I'd say when she came out there, her half marathon time was 3 hours and 6 minutes.
Oh wow!
Half marathon.
Oh.
That's wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she improved that, and we've had a lot of great success stories out there, but this is probably one of the best. She went from 3:06 to a 2:04.
That's significant.
Just kind of learning how to run, and I think I think she's proud of that. But and she's run the New York City Marathon and things like that. But I think she's probably more proud that she's met people out there and new friends, and
That's what it brings you.
it's what it brings you. Yeah.
The days of for me, the early days in the 70s, late 70s, and early 80s, we had a Midtown run from Huey's, and I met more people through that than I met probably in my business affiliations, and they were always and became close friends. I still hear from them. I still see them, although they may not run. And if we see each other out, it's still that bond of shared miles. Shared training, and neither one of us can speak to that enough.
Well, yeah, we talk about Mike Cody, who is probably the most prominent attorney here in Memphis, still alive. Yeah, I think he'd say Lucius Birch was the guy, but who are his friends? And he's going to tell you it's his running buddies. And that's it. He's got his business associates and his friends all over the country, but his true friends are his running buddies.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it is great. And his attorneys, I guess the attorneys he's close to in Memphis are runners.
Yep. Tell me who they are, but there's not. I mean, there are a lot of attorneys that run here in town, but I just think, it's a bond that Mike and I have that it's strictly through running that's blossomed into more than just running. It's just a true friendship, and we're both Memphians, but he's a well-educated person. I'm an undereducated person, so
matters not.
But matters not. There is we shared a lot of fun things together through running, and we had a fun. And I don't know if we got you there or not for the Dave Waddell night. Were you there for the Dave Waddell night? Yeah. Okay. So when we celebrated Dave Waddell's 45th year of winning the gold medal, and that was just a lot of fun. We went way beyond running, but there was that bond of running for everybody there. And we talk about Dave Waddell, a guy who lives here in Memphis, who won the gold medal in '72. Another great story, and another great person too. Just to have to say, a great person has always been accommodating and say, "Hey, listen, we got Mike Cody's birthday coming up. He'd really appreciate if you were there. I'll be there."
If you've never seen Dave Waddell's 800-meter win in the Olympics, you can YouTube it. It's WOTTLE, Dave Waddell. It's a come-from-behind, phenomenal 800-meter race.
Yeah.
If it doesn't give you chills on the up and down your spine and your hair doesn't stand up on the back of your neck, you're probably not a runner.
Well, for an 800-meter race is 2 laps, only 2 laps. And at the end of the first lap, he was in last place. And there are probably eight or 9 competitors in the field. He passed every one of them in 1 lap.
In 1 lap.
In 1 lap.
And he was substantially behind.
Substantially behind after the first half a lap. He was way behind everybody.
And even knowing the outcome, every time I watch that, I always go, he'll never catch him.
He'll never catch him. How did he do it?
How did he do it?
Well, I'll tell you, you know how he did it, don't you? He ran every 200 the same.
Oh, that's right. I remember him telling us.
That's what gave him. I think that's gave him the nickname, the head waiter.
Head waiter.
Or another nickname was the throttle. Waddell, the throttle, yeah. So he could really put down. You know, he's probably Dave Waddell is probably one of the few people that beat Steve Prefontaine at Hayward Field.
I never knew that.
Oh yeah, he beat. I can't remember what year it was. This is probably 73 or 74 like that. And they had this race, which is now I think the Prefontaine meet. And he invited Waddell up to come up there for the mile. And I think they were going to try to break the world record. And stands are full. And Waddell passes Prefontaine after 3/4 lap, somewhere in that last lap, and wins the race. And there was one person cheering for Dave Waddell, his wife. His wife was insane. She said, "I was the only one cheering for Dave in that race. Everybody else was for Prefontaine."
Of course, in Oregon. And if for those of you who don't know Prefontaine, you can Google him or Wikipedia him and find out more about him. He was the bad boy of American running, and yet he was also our hero.
He was probably the most outspoken runner in the United States in the 60s and 70s. I think you'd have to go back a little bit. Wes Santee, probably in the 50s, was the guy that challenged the AAU. He lost that one. Prefontaine changed the landmark. He changed the landscape of how our amateur runners were treated, for sure. I think story goes is that in the NCAA championships in Baton Rouge in one year is Prefontaine had them change the 5K race from 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 9 o'clock. I mean, you got to consider it's just at Baton Rouge. In late May, it's it's probably 90 degrees and 90% humidity. So, but he's the guy that could change it. I remember Dave telling us that story, but he's the only one that could change it, and he's probably the only one that would speak up and say, "We're changing it. This is not good for these runners."
Absolutely.
So, I mean, even if they are just in college, it's still not good. You're not going to get a good time. So, yeah, look at that. Here is in Memphis, Tennessee, which is not a huge city in the country, but you've had all these great runners come through here. Dave Waddell certainly living here, and all these other runners that come in. Dave probably had a lot to do with it. I think Dave Waddell, just kind of like Joan Benoit, you won't see that Wikipedia, but he added, great value there's to the running community. You can say that, hey, listen, you're going to come in here and Dave Waddell and meet Dave Waddell and hang out with Dave Waddell. And Bill Rogers was excited, as was Dave Waddell was excited to, their pass and cross, but Waddell was an 800-meter guy and Rogers a marathon guy, so they pass and cross, but when they got to sit down and have dinner together, it was pretty cool. And for them at CBU to stand here like you and I are sitting here, for them to talk and share stories was great for the Memphis running community.
And when you think in terms of the size of Memphis, as you alluded to, this isn't a major market as far as population goes. And yet this is the third or fourth largest running club in America. Here is Memphis Runners Track Club, which has grown to that point, and its influence. And although I guess they didn't really recognize the fact that Bill was here. I don't know if they came out and interviewed him or not. I wasn't. Anybody, Brent, or anybody from the MRTC?
No. Channel 5 did, though. Joe Birch did a fantastic interview with him. Great interview.
That sort of recognition needs to be made, and I'll put some effort into getting them out.
I'm going to reach out to George Higgs today and say, make sure this is on the calendar.
Yeah,
and we got to get it on the calendar, and it needs to be aware. Everybody needs to be aware of this year for the 5 Mile Classic.
Well, you'll be out at the Mike Cody on February 3rd, which is a week from this coming Saturday.
Yep, this Saturday. And they've had some really cool people come through here for that race too. I'll just tell you one, George Riley, if you remember George Riley.
Yeah.
George Riley. George Riley was a chief counsel for a company called Apple, and he's chief counsel, but he's a Memphian, and so he would always come back. Well, he always came back to do a Christmas Eve run with Cody, but George passed away about 2 years ago, I think in June, maybe 3 years ago now, but he came back. When he was pretty sick, and ran Cody's race in February, and I think he died. Actually, didn't die in June. I think he died in of May of that year.
He was ill.
He was ill. Yeah, he had some cancer, leukemia. I think that's what it was. But anyway, that was his commitment. But here's the guy, chief counsel for Apple, come back and run Mike Cody's race, and he brought along his entourage also, and which is pretty neat that that they still come. I guess I can say Laureen Jobs has come in for that race, and she comes, in memory of George, but also as a connection with Cody also.
Right.
You hear Cody's name mentioned quite a bit, and because he is that big of a figure in Memphis and Memphis running.
And in the national community, civil rights community, his name is still vibrantly used.
He was the keynote speaker up in Springfield, Illinois, maybe last weekend for a group, and just
without him, I would never have done this.
Yeah.
We had talked about it, and I didn't want to have to write a history of Memphis running. I told him, I said, I'll be 150 by the time I finish it. And he began to think, and we began to get together and talk about, what about if we interviewed people, videotaped them, and had it available through the Memphis room here. And the library was gracious enough to offer us free time for this production and post-production too, and it will be available in the Memphis room. Hopefully it'll be linked to the Memphis Runners Track Club through the newsletter, so that you can watch this on your handheld phone. What are your plans for the next, say, year?
For me, what are my plans? My plans are really to get on with this Memorial Day run. And
which is growing.
Which is, well, it is growing. And it brings, the Memorial Day run, I think, brings an awareness to our vets. And for the first year was our World War II vets, and that was 6 years ago, and some of those guys, one of the guys right now has passed away, and a lot of them they're dying pretty quickly.
Right.
They're all over 90 years old. So as we move on, we're going to recognize a Vietnam vet this year who, even after 35 years of seeing service, he still lives with that. So I think that this race brings awareness as to what those people still battle.
Yeah.
I can't imagine still battling something from World War II. When a plane goes overhead, you hide under your bed. I think that's that's a scary thing, but we need to appreciate those people for what they did for us.
And it'll be this Memorial Day, and each Memorial Day. It's in Overton Park.
Just a
Doughboy.
it's just a 3-mile race. I said, there's no way I'm going to do a European distance, a kilometer race. This is an American race for Americans, so we do an American distance. Like back in the day, you had the 5-mile classic, you had the Ocall 3-mile run. These were all races that were started before we're going to change to the metric system. And so the 5-mile classic, we never changed that to somebody had the
8,000 kilometers.
Yeah, the 8K. And so we going from the Memorial Day race to the Bud Mile, and then to the big one this year is the 5-mile classic, and with Bill Rogers and Joe Benoit, which is historical for Memphis. Yeah, it really is historical. And let me ask you a question, Bill. Is that you were on one of the founding fathers of the track club?
Organizers.
Yeah, organizers.
Bud Joyner was tired of actually having to administer and put together the club. He actually started the club with several of his friends, and Jack Rocket had begun talking about it, and I said, well, I was interested, and Mike Cody was interested, so we met and flipped a coin, and Jack lost and became president.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't want to do anything except be the newsletter editor, so I became that, and Mike took care of the charter and some of the legal issues that arose, and that from then it's come to where it is today.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing: is you talk about all those guys. What a great base of people. You and Bud and Jack Rocket. Someone called him the father of nuclear medicine.
Right.
And Mike Cody. Yeah. I mean, that's a great base. You just didn't. I mean, there was no wing in it.
And as we discussed, I think I was in between jobs, so I was probably not employed. And here I have a top flight nuclear medicine guy. I've got a top ranked attorney, Bud, who has done a great job with his running store, Joyner Sports, as well as in his architectural modeling, and me. And we still were a fairly cohesive group of people who had one passion, and that was running.
Yeah.
It's still that way.
Yeah, it's still that way. You look at the old Breakaway store on Union Avenue, and how that's changed, but hasn't changed. I mean, it's changed, but it really hasn't changed. It still has that old feel there.
It does.
It really does have that old feel, and Barry's been a good one to keep up how that feel is. It's not a glitzy high-tech store. It's still just kind of a mom and pop place. And although I don't think that Nike has done a good job of letting go of their small vendors.
Yeah, I don't either. But
you got to remember where they started with, with Nike. You talk about Nike is, Nike, Jim Bailey was one of the major catalysts for Nike.
Oh, really?
Well, and I'll tell you how, is if I can bore you for a couple minutes here, is Jim Bailey.
No boring.
In 55 won the NCAA championships at University of Oregon. His coach was Bill Bowerman, and is one of the guys on the team, maybe not that year, was Phil Knight. So they were the co-founders of Nike. So you had, it was Jim Bailey and Bill Dellinger came first and second in the NCAAs in 55. That was a mile race, and it brought immediate attention to the University of Oregon. Jim will never get credit for that. And then next year is NCAA championships were 1,500 because the Olympics were in 56, so they made it a 1,500. He came in second that year, lost to a guy named Ron Delaney, who won the Olympics in 56 from Ireland. And Jim had a disaster in the Olympics, but probably kind of all started when coming in second in NCAA championships. But Jim, who was here in Memphis, was, I think, a big catalyst for Nike there. And so you got Bowerman and Phil Knight, and they're starting this, and they're selling shoes out of the back of their car. And and interesting is that I asked Bill Rogers about that, and he said Nike offered him $500 to be a sponsor, and maybe Adidas $500, but ASICS offered him $3,000, so he took the ASICS. He took the ASICS deal. Probably one kind of like Jim Bailey that said all this stuff will never sell. A big mistake by Jim Bailey. A big mistake probably by Bill Rogers. I doubt they regret that though.
I do too.
You can't look back on that one, I guess. But it was a big financial mistake, I think, for Jim. If he had just embraced it, he'd have been.
No kidding.
Oh yeah, he'd owned it.
It's astounding how Memphis has had influence in the running world.
Yeah,
and continues to have some input into it. I wish more people recognize the fact that as a runner here in Memphis and in this area, you have a history and a background that you should be proud of and delve into more. But
it's no doubt. Listen, Bill Rogers has been here a couple of times to Memphis before for another race, but this time he got to see Memphis and feel Memphis and go out and have a barbecue and hang out with Dave Waddell and company, and not just Dave Waddell, but the Memphis community. Then he does a run with Cody and company at 7:30 at Overton Park on that Saturday morning, and. It is, but what it is just it's the running community. Is I was looking at something that one of the poorest states in the country is Mississippi, which is right down the road here. But one of the most generous states in the country is Mississippi. And I think Memphis is just an outlet for that. And or Mississippi's an outlet for Memphis on that one. I think Memphis is very generous. To make Bill Rogers to feel comfortable here, that's the one way I think we got Joan Benoit. My strategy was, if it was a strategy, was to say, if we make Bill Rogers feel comfortable, we'll be able to get the queen of running. And we did.
Cool.
And so I think it's a credit to the Memphis running community, or just Memphis in general. It's probably from the guy that greeted him at the Subway, because that's where we went for dinner on Saturday night. That's what he wanted to do. He said, I just want to go to Subway and get a tuna melt and take it back to my hotel. And said, I got a card. I'll take you out for dinner. I said, that's okay. I'm okay. I think I'll go somewhere else after I drop you off. So it was it's all Memphis-based and the people here.
And you've been a very important aspect of it, and I'm so happy to have had you on today.
I'm happy to be here. I appreciate it.
We've been working around this for a couple of months, and finally we're able to break through and get this time available for us. The library was very gracious in allowing us to come in the middle of the day rather than late afternoon. But
thank you for accommodating.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
We'll call this a day.
Okay, great.